Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Australian Anaesthesia podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Susie New from the Australian Society of Anaesthetists. In this episode, I am thrilled to be chatting with Professor Colin Royse. He's a cardiac anaesthetist from the Royal Melbourne Hospital, Melbourne, and a pioneer in the development of echocardiography and ultrasound in the perioperative period. Not only is he a clinician and a researcher, but he's also been behind establishing the clinical ultrasound courses that are delivered by the University of Melbourne. The ASA has recognised him as a pioneer, so much so that he was awarded the William Russ Pugh Award at the end of last year for his outstanding contribution to anaesthesia in Australia. I was really moved by the words he said on the night when he accepted the award, and I wanted to share with you some of those words. He has a very, very interesting take on what it means to be a pioneer, and he shares some really critical insights into his career. So I hope you enjoy hearing about them as much as I did. All right, let's get into it. Thank you for giving up some time this evening to chat. And the reason I wanted to catch up with you was to say congratulations on being awarded the William Russ Pugh Award, otherwise known as the Pugh Award from the ASA. And I loved when you accepted your award last year. You just had a beautiful story and a beautiful way of talking about the award and about research. And I really wanted to share that story with people who listen to the podcast.
Terrific. It was certainly a great honour and a surprise to actually receive that award. I was travelling back from Brazil after seeing my son, and there was this email from ASA President, and you think, oh, well, another email. I opened it and said, congratulations on the William Russ Pugh Award. And I thought, wow.
One of the final things you said on the night was that this was the first award you have ever won.
Correct.
Which I found so hard to believe because I actually have had the opportunity to glance at your CV, and you've had over 230, probably more now, 230 papers published, over 7,800 citations, over 5 million in competitive research grants. And this is the first award that you've been awarded. So
very much so.
I still can't believe that. I'm surprised by that. And I was really impressed that you went back, and I've learned a little bit more about history of anaesthesia and developing more of an appreciation for it. And I really like that you went back and did a bit of research on who William Russ Pugh was. Do you remember that?
I do, yes, because, I'd heard of him. Obviously, most people have heard of him as the first guy who gave the first anaesthetics in Australia, but very few people know anything about him other than that. And so many pioneers in their field often have a really turbulent path. So it was quite fascinating to see the sort of character he was, and also, how he managed to get himself in a pickle on many occasions. Let's
break that down a little bit, if that's okay. First of all, going back to the bit that most people would know, which is that he gave the first anaesthetic in Australia. And so I believe that was in Tasmania. Was it in Launceston?
Launceston, yes.
And we're talking in the mid-1800s here, sort of not long after the first anaesthetic was demonstrated in the Ether Dome in Boston.
That's right. It's roughly 9 months after.
That's pretty impressive progress, isn't it?
Yeah. When you think of how long it would have taken for the news to spread, 6 weeks on a ship, it's the earliest you'd see it.
Yeah, true.
To then go ahead and get himself organised to actually deliver the first anaesthetic.
And do we know much about what that first anaesthetic was?
Pretty sure it was ether, and he made his own ether. I don't think it was chloroform. I think that came later.
Wow.
And, of course, he had to devise his own respirator, really, to administer it.
Yes.
He had sort of like a strong interest in chemistry and all sorts of naturalistic things. So he was probably quite well equipped that he could manufacture that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, to put it all together and just have the guts to do it is amazing.
Very much so. Do we know whether he was a doctor or a dentist? I mean, this is the very early days of anaesthesia.
He was a doctor. He was actually a surgeon.
Ah, okay.
Which my dear brother crowed about.
Because your brother's a surgeon as well.
That's right.
Yeah,
so there you go. Surgeon gave the first anaesthetic, blah, blah.
Right.
But I mean, I guess in those days, a lot of the general physicians stroke practitioners did everything.
Exactly.
They probably were called surgeons because they did a bit more of that than attending to other illnesses.
That's true. He probably was a bit of an all-rounder. And anaesthesia certainly wasn't a specialty at that stage. It was still people experimenting. I wonder, because I just did the recent podcast where I looked at the founders or the discoverers of anaesthesia, and some of them experimented, as was quite often then, experimented on themselves and got into all sorts of trouble for it. Not legal trouble, because at that time they didn't have classification of what was a legal substance or not. But some of these substances could be very addictive and so forth. Do we know much about how he came to discover it or create it or anything like that?
No, I think he'd heard about it from the Boston demonstration. And presumably ether was a known compound. Yep. He just had to know how to manufacture it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's how do you deliver it to the patient? When you think about it, they wouldn't have had oxygen in those days.
No, true.
In some ways, you have to be a bit lucky, I think, to get through your first few cases and not knock them off, because that would have put us back a few years.
Oh, exactly. Well, I think it was only 18 months after the first anaesthetic that Morton demonstrated that we had our first death under anaesthesia.
Right, yes.
So he's in that sort of golden period before a death's been recorded, thankfully. So, you describe him as a pioneer. And I remember you did talk about what is it? What is it about a pioneer? What is it about the character of the person?
So a true pioneer is actually a personality defect.
Really?
Because you have to do it. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. Why just not do what everyone else does? But you feel compelled to do it and nothing can stop you.
Wow. And
that's a true pioneer. So that if you think about most innovations that are groundbreaking, people really have to push and go out and on a limb and take a risk to make it happen. Otherwise, you'd never do it. Everyone will tell you, oh, no, that shouldn't do that. It ain't broke, don't fix it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. You're going to be dangerous to the patients and so forth. So, in fact, to do something, number one, you must fundamentally believe in it. But secondly, you've got to have that intestinal fortitude, or what I call the personality defect, that says, I will do it, whatever the risk.
Would you describe yourself like that?
Not as quite the same degree as William Pugh, but I think the same personality defect comes through.
I have thought that before. I remember I was at one of the congresses. It might have been the one that you were scientific convener for here in Melbourne in 2018.
We were on the same committee.
That's right. Yeah. But I remember just, there was a researcher who was giving their keynote and they do, as I think is so powerful. They speak in the first person. They said, first I asked the question this, and so our lab did that. And then we actually found that happened in that situation, but not in every situation. So then I asked the question this, and you just get this feeling that they are right on the edge of knowledge. And they don't know, when they first publish something, they don't know whether in the future, in 6 months, a year's time, someone's going to come back and say, actually, when we redid the experiments, they were wrong, and the right answer, it looks like it's closer to this.
That's right.
Which must be very exciting.
Look, it is exciting. There's no question about it. But it's fraught with difficulty.
I can imagine.
Particularly if you are in an area that is too far ahead. So if you want an easy life in research, pick on the edges. Take a trial that was done with 100 patients, make it 2,000 patients. And massage your secondary endpoint so that if something comes out positive, no one's going to criticise you for that, but it's not really groundbreaking.
Yeah.
To take something that's completely novel and really push it is a different story, because, it's just the human nature of change. Most people resist change. Most people find 10 reasons not to change until it's gone along far enough that it's what everyone does. I think it's a human nature thing. I think it's specific to anaesthesia.
I think you're right. It happens with research. It's happened throughout medicine. I mean, the idea of washing hands.
Yeah.
And sterile technique.
Preposterous, really, Susie.
They thought it was crazy back in the day.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that how you would describe some of the research that you've done?
I think some of the developments. So, introducing echo back in 1995 was horribly controversial. I was almost a heretic. Terribly dangerous, horrible.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? Dosing patients. So the fascinating thing about echo, of course, is that we introduced transesophageal echo first because the need was for cardiac surgery. The transthoracic and the multiple use of POCUS, including for regional, followed later.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you're using an invasive device. You're putting something, and you could tear an esophagus, you could kill a patient.
Yeah, true.
And so that was where the danger signal came in.
Right.
And when you introduce a new technique like that, people don't balance the benefit it does against the occasional risk. Much easier to say, well, it's a dangerous thing, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And of course, I was young. I was super enthusiastic. I knew the answer. This is that personality defect coming through, right?
Right.
But when you're a young enthusiast and you tell the world it's going to change everything you do,
Yeah.
you now are not reading the room of the older people or your contemporaries.
Yeah.
The older people
Yeah.
disrespecting them, and the younger people, you're threatening them. And that's just human nature. So you've got to be smarter about how you introduce change than what I did back in the mid-90s.
So back in the mid-90s, intraoperative toe for cardiac surgery was just not done.
Yeah, prior to sort of 1994, 95 in Australia. So there are about half a dozen people around the country that were on the same journey as me.
Yeah.
If you go back just a few years before, Mike Cahalan, who's one of the real pioneers of intraoperative echo, in 1992, he smuggled a toe probe from Germany into the States.
So is that defect coming through again?
Exactly. So we're probably talking about early 90s to 1995 that people around the world were saying, this is going to change what we do. We've got to do it.
Right.
And I'd actually realised the importance of echo back in 1992.
Yeah.
When I was doing a cardiology rotation, and I was doing the coronary care, and a patient who's clearly in heart failure, and the director of cardiology was doing the ward round and said, well, Colin, what would you do? And being an anaesthetist, I said, well, I put a Swan-Ganz catheter in, I measure his cardiac output, and if it's low, I'm going to give him some inotropes.
Yeah.
And he said, no. He gets the phone, calls someone, around comes an echo tech, puts a transthoracic echo probe, and in front of your eyes, you could see the whole anterior wall was not moving. Dilated heart.
Wow.
Clearly, this guy was in severe heart failure.
Right. And you're like, if I can bring this into the operating room.
Yep. Penny drop then. And it took me until my fellowship year to get the opportunity to learn it.
The stage that penny dropped for you, what stage of your career were you at?
First year registrar.
Okay.
So Pat Mackay at the time wanted us to do more medicine. So she'd organised these 6-month rotations through cardiology for first years.
Progressive thinker.
Yeah, she was.
So your penny dropped in your first year, and then in your fellowship you're able to explore it further. I could see that could potentially be a barrier for trying to get something up and running because it's, you're not a specialist yet, you're only a fellow. Was the technique being done in other parts of the world? Mostly
in the States, a couple of European countries. And even in the States, it wasn't that common. It was very much emerging.
And now it's common. I haven't been in a cardiac theatre for a long time, but when I trained, it was every cardiac anaesthetic.
In medicine, for a full cycle of change in medicine, it's usually around 20 years. If you think about major techniques, drugs, whatever. Intraoperative echo was incredibly fast.
How fast are we talking?
So we're talking that in most of the major centres in Australia, within 5 years, it was routine. Wow. And I think even the laggard centres about 5 years after that.
Wow.
It was basically you do echo or you don't do cardiac.
All right. When I hear that, it makes it sound like it was actually quite easy to get that change in. But you said before there were some challenges.
There were some huge challenges, Susie. For me personally, because, I was the person stepping out. I basically stood on a pedestal for people to throw tomatoes at or knives in my back. And
really?
In fact, that's exactly what happened to me.
What happened?
So my fellowship year, I was due to be appointed as a consultant the next year. And literally about 4 weeks before Christmas, the director said to me I didn't have a job the next year.
Oh.
And so at a very fledgling stage, I had to go out and find work and try and get some cardiac. And that's when I think I mentioned in my speech, I thank Michael Davies because he took me on and gave me enough that I could keep doing it and keep growing.
Yeah, great. He's the director at St V's for people who don't know, and a great leader.
It was a fantastic guy. Yeah. But it was very nasty. There was some real politics that went on and that was, I guess, the price you pay for being that innovator.
Yes. And I think you mentioned in your speech it came at a personally very difficult time. I talked to your daughter actually on the night and she recalls it. She remembers how stressful that was for your family.
Well, at the time, Georgia was actually 8 weeks old.
Okay, so she doesn't recall it.
She doesn't recall it, but, she would have heard about it. But, my wife was planning to have some time off work and so forth, and she had to go back to work so we could pay the mortgage, and it was very stressful. When you get told that, like early December, all the jobs are given away.
Exactly. And before Christmas, we just shut down over December and January. Yeah. No one's recruiting at that time. Gosh.
Yes. So they were hard yards, but when I look back on it, with my wisdom now, I would have managed change differently. I don't think I wouldn't have done the change. I just may have been a little more careful about how I did it.
What are the lessons that you learned? What would you tell yourself if you could?
It's difficult to actually get out and do it and get the experience and be creative in it. You had to take that leap. And I basically learnt off a cardiologist, Leanne Grigg. And the reason I got there is because she taught her brother-in-law as a Sydney anaesthetist just before he did a sabbatical with her. So she'd set a precedent to teach anaesthetists. Mm-hmm. I think I was the last one, mind you, but all the same, it was a very fortuitous period. To get practicing, I wasn't doing a huge amount of cardiac. The fellowship arrangement at the hospital wasn't 5 days a week. You might be lucky to get 2 days a week. So I'd actually borrow an ultrasound machine from cardiology for my after-hours work. And if I had a sick patient, I'd stick the probe down and use it for sort of non-cardiac purpose. And I think that's probably where people really got their nose out of joint. Who's this upstart doing an echo in middle of the night, bringing this machine up? But if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I could have consulted more widely, sucked up to a few people, communicated better, all the human factors that soften.
It's people,
it's
isn't
people.
it? Yeah.
And when you're a young enthusiast, you kind of get lost in the enthusiasm and not think about the factors.
I think we've all been there. We've all been that bull at the gate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably a good description. But, if I'd been a softy, play this thing, be politically correct, it probably wouldn't have happened. So again, it's that tension between what does it take to make the break or not.
Exactly.
I mean, some of your listeners might think it crazy, but ultrasound-guided regional anaesthesia was once highly controversial.
What was the controversy for those of us who are believers and can't imagine it?
Because it's new.
Yeah. Just because it's new, do you think?
Because it's new. That's right. So, there was debate in the early 2000s about who should be credentialed to do ultrasound-guided regional. And I remember this editorial written by a radiologist. Well, we think anaesthetists should be allowed to do it, but only under supervision from a board-certified radiologist.
Oh, right.
So again, it's that pushing on someone else's patch.
It sounds a bit turf warish when you hear it like
Very
that.
Turf warish. And also people who were experts in the traditional way or experts of the nerve stimulator felt wedded to. I think what a lot of our younger colleagues don't appreciate is that back in the day, if you were one of those good blockers, and they were known, right, they were usually good blockers in one block only. They were the axillary plexus blockers or they're the sciatic nerve blockers.
Yeah, that's right.
And what ultrasound did is just free you up to do pretty much any block in the whole body. And so then if you're a great axillary blocker and your fellow says, can you show me how to do a sciatic nerve block? They would have been extremely uncomfortable about it. And therefore it's easier to make excuses why you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But it was probably the first ultrasound-guided regional workshop I think it was 2005 or 2006 in Sydney.
Yeah.
So it's not that long ago. And of course, shortly after that, it just took off. It was one of those incredibly rapid, same with ultrasound-guided vascular. Those two techniques just flourished. And before you knew it, the nerve stimulators almost relegated to the history books.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know if you look at the Nisaura site very often, but they seem to advocate doing both ultrasound and nerve stimulator. And I wonder if that's just an American practice or whether we've in Australia have deviated from global practice.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And there is probably the really deep blocks. There's probably some value for it when your fidelity of imaging starts to diminish as you go deeper.
Yeah.
Like if you do an anterior sciatic nerve block, that's really deep. Unless you've got really good images, maybe having a nerve stomach to help. But I don't think Australian practice would support that other than a few blocks. We're so used to being able to visualise the needles. Because the other thing too, of course, is that technology's improved so much. Our ultrasound imaging is so much better than it was 15 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose when I first learnt it was around about that time. I want to come back. There was something else you mentioned in your talk, which was that you fell into research. You didn't really intend to become a researcher.
The crazy story was that when I was a second or third year registrar, we'd had a first child. My wife was wanting to be a nephrologist. And so in order to balance life with the baby, she signed up to do an MD because in those days you wouldn't get a job in a good nephrology department without a higher degree. So she said, well, I might as well do it now then, as she said to me, and then you will go and do your research degree and look after the baby while I finished my training. And I got marched off to go and see the professor of anaesthesia and pitch that when I finished this in a couple of years, I'd like to do an MD. Now, as it turns out, she discovered she hated hospitals, did some general practice, loved it, bye-bye MD. The main reason I went and did it is because my throat had been cut clinically.
Right.
So it was a matter of necessity. If I did not prove that what I was doing had some good basis to it, I might as well pack up cardiac anaesthesia.
Oh, my goodness.
That's the reality of it. And it's through that vehicle that I also got back into Royal Melbourne a couple of years later because there was value in the research.
So was this the time when you thought you had a specialist job and then they told you, we actually don't have a job for you?
Yeah, correct. And again, Michael Davies was very helpful in facilitating that research, at least to start at St Vincent's, but then by the time I got into it, I'd gone back to Royal Melbourne.
Yeah.
But it was just, there was a vision there and he knew this was important too because it was fledgling at St Vincent's as well.
Yes, right.
And if you can show what you're doing is right, you're on much safer grounds.
Yeah.
But during that time, I actually really enjoyed the research and that's kind of what pushed me to keep going.
Yeah, great. And when you say the research, was it structured in the MD or were you doing a PhD at that stage?
Well, I was an MD prospectively,
yeah,
which effectively is a PhD.
Right.
You know, it took me 3 years. It was prospective. It could have been called a PhD. In those days, it was probably more common for doctors to do MDs.
Did you ever wonder during that time if I'm wrong about this?
Oh, many times.
Yeah. What was that like? You've got your young family, you're struggling to get clinical work, you've put your life into this research.
It's really hard, Susie. And there are many times in my career that I've had those similar sentiments. You know, as I'm in the twilight of my career now, I sometimes look back and say, you know, life would have been much easier. I would have earned a hell of a lot more money if I hadn't done this path.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you've got a personality defect that makes you do it, well, you do it. And that's what you wear.
I'm starting to worry that I might have a personality defect as well. Because do you ever think, you know, sometimes I meet patients and when I talk with them, they've lived in the same house for 30, 40 years. They've gone to work. They've done the same job. They come home. They eat their dinner with their missus. There's usually a bloke that I'm talking about with this. Could be either gender, of course. You know, they watch a bit of TV and they do the same thing the next day and the next day. And there's a part of me sometimes that wishes that I too could just find satisfaction in that kind of life.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. It's like the thing that I found hardest is that there was no regularity to my week or to my earnings. There was in terms of your public hospital days, that was regular. But the rest, particularly in cardiac, was very variable.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you see it, I was very much tied with my brother who has an equal personality defect when it comes to innovation. And he's one of the world pioneers of total arterial revascularization.
Wow.
And he, like me, did it.
Yeah. True.
And so we're kind of stuck together and we still do.
Oh, good.
But that meant a long drought of private practice.
So did you work with your brother?
I still do, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've done for 25 years.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
How is that? What is it like being in the same theatre with your family member?
Look, he and I we're quite different personalities, I think, and so we complement. And I think there's an unspoken trust.
Yes.
And a support that's always there. Through thick and thin, there will be a support. Lovely. And the patients love it. I give them a cognitive test because they say, oh, are you Alistair's brother? I said, yes, I am. But there's only 4 things you have to remember. And they look at me, I say, and I'm going to test you after surgery, see if your brain's still working. Okay, so I'm the younger, taller, smarter and better looking brother.
Surely they would get all 4 right post-operatively, right?
They better do. Otherwise it's cognitive impairment. PACD says, you know. It's been a great journey because we've done a lot of research and education together. He was very much a part of the setting up the graduate diploma journey for ultrasound and our research trials together.
What a great thing to have such a good working relationship with one of your family members. Wonderful. Yeah. This is a question I normally ask the presidents that I've spoken with of the ASA. It was in actually the lead up to that 90th birthday episode. But given your defect, as you keep calling it.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you think the last 90 years of anaesthesia in Australia? We've gone from very basic anaesthetics to intubation routinely now for neurosurgery, much better monitoring. We've got AI kind of bearing down on us at the moment. We've got other things, robots maybe, who knows. But what do you think the next 90 years of anaesthesia might look like in Australia?
Well, I think the next 20 years, if I can start with that, it's about perioperative medicine and being more than just the intraoperative technician.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical. If we don't seize that, we will be replaced by an AI bot, because part of it is we've made anaesthesia so safe. You know, we're almost cutting ourselves out of a deal here by doing such a good job.
Yeah.
So I think that ability to be the physician, and to me personally, the real enabler is multi-organ point-of-care ultrasound.
Multi-organ point-of-care.
So we all think the term POCUS. Everyone thinks of the heart, transthoracic echo. It's been the focus, right?
Yeah.
That's simply ultrasound examination of the heart.
Exactly.
We should do it of the lungs, of the abdomen, of deep veins, of joints, and so forth. So lung ultrasound is incredibly simple, right? There's 6 patterns. That's all you got to learn. And you can just shove it on your chest and get the pictures.
Wow. You make it sound easy. I just look for crawling ants. That's my one sign that I look for.
But still, that's one of the 6 patterns, isn't it? And if you see absence of crawling things, then you know you've got a problem.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we have to become better diagnosticians. And I think this is where my vision of periop medicine diverges perhaps from what the current thinking is in Australia, in that basically we're quite well trained medically as anaesthetists, but we don't have the special diagnostic skills. And what I mean by that, bedside diagnostic skills, and that means in this day and age is ultrasound.
Right.
Like you can send people for CT or a X-ray, but anaesthetists rarely do that.
Yes, true.
But if you're assessing a patient by the bedside and they're worried about their breathing, is it heart or is it lungs? And very quickly you can do a bedside examination with ultrasound and come up with a much better working diagnosis.
Yeah.
The problem we face is that the physicians are just around the corner.
Yes.
And if we do not act to seize a reasonable ground in perioperative medicine, it's going to be taken from us.
Right.
Because I can tell you the general physicians are champing at the bit to get into ultrasound, and they've got the medical knowledge.
Yeah, right.
So, what we've got perhaps a bit more headway at the moment is in clinical ultrasound, and they've got the headway in terms of medical knowledge.
Right.
So we've got to be careful. And an example of some of the pioneering work that's happening here is what Guy Ludbrook's doing in Adelaide.
Yes.
With his ARRC.
Yes, which is the
Enhanced Recovery Room Care.
That's right.
And he's done an amazing job because he's
fantastic.
shown that it improves your outcomes. And he's even looking data at 18 months. That's looking very promising for improved outcomes as well. And it's the old story. Once you have a complication, the die is cast. Your long-term outcomes are affected more. So it's about picking it up early, knowing how to treat it, continuing monitoring. That loop we're actually quite good at. Make a diagnosis, do it. But you need the skill set, and the difference in skill set is adding bedside ultrasound.
Yeah, right.
And so that's actually, to me, is critically important in development perioperative medicine. You can have all the, I know with the CCG, this little funny wave is here, and I can talk about all the medical syndromes, but if you can't make that diagnosis, you're not going to be as effective as a perioperative physician.
Yes.
So that's 20 years.
Yeah.
And we either take it or we lose it, right?
Yeah.
And I think after that, the next 90 years will be about, again, incremental safety.
Yes.
And probably a diminution of our value in the operating room.
Yes.
Which is quite scary, really, to think about. But if we're not careful about value adding to what we do, why would you not get a lesser trained person or an AI bot to do it for you?
Yeah. Especially some of the technical things like difficult intubations may become a thing of the past. We might just have a little robot that looks like a worm that just passes a tube
shoves it in. Exactly. Yeah, so I'm hopeful that we will still be very relevant.
Yes.
But we have to be smart about how we engineer the future.
Yeah, good points. If someone is listening and they think, yes, perioperative bedside ultrasound, multi-organ is the way to go, but I'm not in a training institution, I'm mid-career, I'm late career, how do I access that? How do I learn that? How do I get into it?
So the great thing is, Susie, when I started, it was kind of self-taught and you just had to go out there and find a way of doing it. Yeah. Whereas now there are so many different resources. the knowledge base. There are multiple ways to get it. In my own institution, the University of Melbourne, we're running everything from specialist certificate, which is 2 subjects really focused on multi-organ POCUS, all the way through to masters. And that gives the knowledge and case interpretation.
Yeah.
The hand skills, there are a multitude of workshops, simulator programs available here and overseas. And what people don't appreciate is that when you're starting off with ultrasound, you can divide into thirds. The sort of the hands-on component is only a third. The knowledge is a third, and then the practice is a third. For example, with heart ultrasound, the basic heart ultrasound, we know that about 30 practices, people start to get confident.
Right.
It's quite quick. Lung would be even quicker, and so forth, right? Yeah. As you get more experienced and advanced, actually the practice and the hands-on becomes much less. It actually is your knowledge and your cognitive interpretation.
Yeah.
So providing you can get a start.
Yes.
A lot of your online resources that we have available today can allow you to progress.
Well, that's good. And that's a good way of thinking about that, because I commonly hear that from people who've, say, gone to a conference, done an ultrasound workshop and gone, yeah, that's great, I think I got it, but I'm just going to struggle being able to implement that in my day-to-day anaesthetic practice. Yeah,
you need more than a conference workshop. Generally, they're so short that you get a taste.
Exactly.
But we run simulated programs. There are other companies that do face-to-face, hands-on, 2, 3, 4 days of practice. You can go and do sabbaticals when you get a chance. And interestingly, you're talking about mid-career people, but of course, when Echo all started years ago, mostly mid-career people that were learning.
Oh, there you go.
And we had to, for the next decade, perhaps even 15 years, we're mainly training consultants.
Yeah.
And it's only when we had a sufficient core that they could then help others that we'd start to get the fellows and the registrars interested.
Yeah, I see. So don't feel like you've missed the boat if you're mid-career.
No. And it's fun. It's exciting. It's a gadget to play with. And we love gadgets, don't we, in anaesthesia?
Oh, we do.
Yeah. The amazing thing is it's the penny drop. At the moment, I'm running a huge trial throughout Australia looking at basic transthoracic echo or not before fracture neck or femur surgery. Yeah. It's called the Echonoff 3 trial, right? Now, it's like you can think, oh, I know what's wrong with this patient. And then someone gives you the report and it says severe aortic stenosis, biventricular failure. And you think, oh, my God. It's even more powerful if you've put the wand on the patient and you see it for yourself because you didn't think it was that and now you've totally changed your mind.
Exactly. And hopefully saved a patient's life.
Hopefully, yeah. And a couple of those and all of a sudden you're infected with the echo virus and it's lifelong.
Yeah. I think you're one of the main sources. If there was going to be source control, it would be containing you.
Don't tell people, they might lock me up in quarantine.
No, we've had enough of that. Oh, dear. Well, look, it's been wonderful chatting with you tonight. I didn't doubt that it would be. It's always great catching up with you. Is there anything else that you would like to say either about research, echo, ultrasound, anything? The mic is yours.
Look, I think I'm very pleased that more and more anaesthetists are actually taking up the challenge of doing serious research. You know, I was one of the early guys doing an MD. Now there's probably 5 or 6 people in my institution who either done it or doing it. And what I think is really important is that the older people like me don't try and take the patch. You've got to let them develop their own patch. My job is to mentor them to create their patch. And if more of old people like me do that, then, of course, you get that next generation who inspires the younger people.
Correct.
And I'd love to see a lot more of that happen in Australia.
Oh, I am 100% in agreement with you. I think it's one of those things, there's a term for it, but I think it's part of authentic leadership, that once you are looking at who you and what you are as a leader, then the obvious thing is to help, as you say, mentor, sponsor, guide the next generation coming through. That's your biggest contribution. Yeah,
I can see it already. I've got some fantastic early to mid research career people who are carving their patch right now. And they will be the people you'll be inviting to the conferences of the future as the experts. Yeah, fantastic. And I have no doubt that you're doing a great job in supporting them and mentoring them along as well. Well, look, thank you. Thank you very much for your time tonight. You're welcome, Cersei.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing from Colin as much as I enjoyed chatting with him. He's always been really, really lovely to chat with, and I hope that came across in our conversation. And I loved some of the deep insights that he shared as he reflected on his career's many, many years of research and excelling in the development of education, as well as no doubt clinically. What do you think? Did any of those words ring with you? Do you identify the same personality defect? Perhaps that drive for research? Perhaps you see yourself more as an innovator or inventor. Well, if you're in the research camp, then I hope you are aware of the many, many, many prizes that the ASA awards. Some of them come with significant amounts of cash too. If you want to find out more about those, then head over to the Spark page on the ASA website. Spark stands for the Science Prizes, Awards and Research Committee. And they oversee many of the awards and prizes and grants that are funded by the ASA. If you see yourself more as an innovator or inventor, perhaps you too have developed an educational resource or written a book, or maybe you just want to see what other anaesthetists have been doing in their spare time. If that's you, then I invite you to head over to the Innovations and Inventions webpage on the ASA website, where we showcase some of the side hustles, for want of a better word, from some of our members. If you want to get the word out there about some of the work that you're doing, then do feel free to contact me via email on podcast@asa.org.au, and we may even be able to feature you on the podcast and on the website. Of course, I'll put a link to those pages in the show notes for this episode. All right, in the meantime, I hope you let your personality defect shine through, because that's hopefully how we inspire, innovate, and make change for the better. All right, until the next episode, I hope you stay well and safe out there.